Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you're joining us from for Data Platform Summit 2020, and in particular for my session today on Azure Data Studio Above and Beyond. My name's Warwick. I'm a Data Platform MVP, Microsoft Certified Master, and the Principal Consultant with SQL Masters Consulting. The most important part about this slide are my contact details. Feel free to reach out and ask me any questions from today's session via my Twitter account, LinkedIn, or via the company email. Before we get started in today's session, I want to say a special thanks to Microsoft for supporting Data Platform Geeks and SQL Server Geeks community initiatives. Just like myself and many other community speakers, Microsoft has a number of speakers presenting at this conference. Make sure that you take advantage of this conference and learn from all of the speakers from Microsoft and the community to improve your data platform learning. So what are we going to be talking about and learning about in today's session? Well, the first thing is I'm going to take you through the history of Azure Data Studio. I'm going to give you an overview of what is Azure Data Studio, how you can use it so that you can be more productive in your environment. And the big thing is that you don't have to step outside of this single tool to be able to do your job. Now, regardless whether you're a DBA, a developer, or a data scientist, I'm sure that there's other roles that I have missed, but regardless of whether you're one of those, you can do everything that I'm going to take you through today, all from inside of this one tool, and be more productive in your working day to day. Like the abstract says, this session is a heavy demoed session. We're going to spend very little time inside of PowerPoint. Once we do go across from PowerPoint into the application, I'm going to take you through how do we get Azure Data Studio, what is Azure Data Studio, what are some of the new features, what are some of the old features that I still think you should know about, and generally how you can become very productive and the types of things that you can do working inside of Azure Data Studio. So let's start with the history of Azure Data Studio. When I first started using it, it was actually known as SQL Ops Studio, and it was initially released on November 15, 2017. And just like Management Studio, Azure Data Studio comes with a monthly release cycle. After nearly 12 months, we got a GA release of the product, and we had a name change. And so we went from SQL Ops Studio to Azure Data Studio. Now, with its naming, don't be afraid and think that Azure Data Studio is only for working inside of Azure. It's not. It's something that you can use to work on your entire data platform environment. It's just a name, and given that our data platform environment is exploding into Azure more and more, but the tool is for whether you're working on premises or in the cloud. Continuing on, we still have that monthly release cycle where we're able to get new features or feature enhancements, bug fixes, etc. released on a very quick cadence. If you're wanting to assist the product team with those particular releases or with features that might be an improvement or a requirement for a lot of people, then we've also got Azure Data Studio Insiders, where you can see those features and what's coming about before it's actually made generally available for you to use in your production environments. Also, you can go to GitHub and have a look at all of the lists of requests, of feature requests that people have put in, upvote those, and you get to have your input in the guidance and the direction of where this wonderful tooling goes. So what is Azure Data Studio? Well, many of you, like myself, when I first started working with SQL Server, we were working with Management Studio. Actually, I tell a little bit of a lie. I am going to show my age, and I was working with SQL Server before Management Studio, but that's a whole nother story. But Management Studio only supported and worked on a Windows environment because that's all SQL Server was working on. Well, with the release of SQL Server 2017, we got SQL Server on Linux. Hence, we needed something to be able to manage and maintain our environments on not just a Windows platform. So we got Azure Data Studio, and it's a true multi-platform environment that allows us to work with our SQL Server and more, we'll get to that, but on Windows, on Linux, or on a Mac OS. Like I said, it's not just about Azure. So your estate, because our data is exploding so rapidly, we no longer have databases or data just in an on-premises environment. But we can manage those from Azure Data Studio for all of our on-premises environments. If we look at Azure, we can have our Azure SQL databases, our managed instances, Azure Data Warehouse. We can access those and everything from Management Studio to a point. But Azure Data Studio, where it goes to the next level, you can see up in the top right-hand corner, PostgreSQL. Hang on a minute, that's not SQL Server. But because our data environments are exploding, as data professionals, we need to be able to work with multiple things which are just outside of SQL Server. So from Azure Data Studio, we can connect to PostgreSQL. We've got Custo or Azure Data Explorer. We'll have a look at that later in the demo. Azure Arc. We can look at our experience with Azure Data Studio and Azure Arc for our environments. Containerization is becoming even bigger and bigger, that as a professional, you might want to start and have a look at containerization, i.e. Docker, and how you can incorporate that and work with that in your environment. And I'll show you in the demo how you can do that straight from Azure Data Studio. From another Azure standpoint, you might be looking at IoT or the Internet of Things. Where does that fit in? Well, we've got extensions and we're able to work with IoT or from Azure Data Studio. Or if you're wanting to take that analytical side of things one step further, we've now got an extension for machine learning, allowing you to work with the data you've got, perform some models, and analyze that data to come up with different outcomes to take you on different paths. So Azure Data Studio allows us to be very flexible and very productive. But how? As a default, Azure Data Studio is very limited in the type of things that it can do. Where I mentioned just before about regarding what type of role you're working in, this is where you'll determine what type of extensions you want to install to make it fit purpose for you. Now here are some extensions, and there's a load more extensions, but here are some of my recommended extensions that I think you should install in your environment, especially if you're a database administrator managing and maintaining your data suite. I'm not going to read through these. You can read through these yourselves and you can have a look at them on your own time. We will have a look at some of these in the demo. Now, I did say that we wouldn't be spending a lot of time inside of PowerPoint, and as you can see, we're already at the demo stage. So for now and the majority of the rest of this session, we're actually going to be working inside of Azure Data Studio, where I'm going to show you how you can become more productive and the types of things you can use Azure Data Studio for. So let's dive in and have a look. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to be able to download and install Azure Data Studio. It's very simple for us to do. We come along to the Microsoft Docs website, looking for the download and install Azure Data Studio. And if we scroll down just a little bit, we can see here's our 3 platforms that we're supported at the moment to do our installs for. Choose yours appropriately, Windows, Mac OS or Linux, and you'll get the same user experience managing your data estate. If you're wanting to assist or like working on the bleeding edge, then we want to work with the Insiders Edition. And that's simple enough for us to undertake. On this same page, we can scroll down a little bit further, and there we go. We've got the Insiders build for Azure Data Studio. Download, install, just like we would for the GA product. So now that we've been able to download this product, let's have a look what it looks like and how we can use it. Now that we've got it installed, the first time that we start it up, what we'll be greeted with is the welcome page. The first time you start this up, you will be asked, do you want to enable the preview features? I recommend yes. It means that there's certain features which are in preview mode only, whether that be in the tool or whether that be with some of the extensions, but you're able to take advantage and utilize and see what they look like in the real version so that you've got a bit of an idea as to what's maybe coming. So take advantage of that. It'll just help your user experience when working inside of Azure Data Studio. Now on this welcome page, we can see there's a number of things that are available to us to help us on our way. We've got some quick start clicks that we can do. Create a connection, create a notebook, run a query, deploy a server. We can do all of these things from other parts inside of Azure Data Studio, but to help you get us started, here they are, or you might first come in and go, oh, I want to do this, right? Nice and simple, easy for you to use. If we scroll down a little bit further, there's useful links which take us to documentation, there's additional learning videos that you can look on, and there's also information about potential extensions that you may want to install. Extensions are very important to this because, like I said on the slide decks, this is what makes the Azure Data Studio so flexible, and you can pick and choose how you want to use it based on what your requirements are. So let's have a look at the extensions. So if we come over and have a look at the extensions, we can see that I've already got a number of extensions installed. There's also a number of recommended extensions that are either from Microsoft or from vendors or from other community contributors. So let's have a look. What have we got? So with the 47 that we have got, it's easy enough. We just pick and choose what we're wanting. How do we install them? Well, we just click on the install and away it goes. However, certain vendor extensions won't just install directly. They do require you to go off and download a v6 file. And that's a good thing. If you happen to be working in an environment where you don't happen to have internet connectivity, then you can go and download this externally, provide the v6 file to your security team. They can do all of their screenings, sign off and say, yeah, this is okay for you to run in your environment. It's then placed on the workstation or server that you require, and you're then able to install it. So how do we install that? Well, we come up here and we click on Install from v6, navigate to that v6 file, and job done. We've now got that extension in place. So let's have a look at what I've already got installed, and we're going to use some of these in the demo today. Like we saw on the welcome page, the admin pack. If I just open this up, it gives us 4 extensions which you can install individually, but this just makes it easier, right? So we're more productive. We install 1 and we get 4. As an administrator, these are the tasks that you would want to be looking at undertaking on a regular basis, so it's a recommendation to have these in place. We spoke about the different environments that our environments are exploding out to. And you might be working in an environment where you're wanting to install SQL Server on an edge device. Well, we've got you covered. We've got an Azure Edge deployment extension. That changes that deployment experience on how we're able to deploy. And we'll have a look at that towards the end of the demo. Data virtualization. This particular extension allows us to access the Polybase external tables, manage and maintain our big data clusters. Big data clusters, they're just another data source for us. I'm not going to talk about big data clusters. If you're wanting to know about big data clusters, make sure you go to Ben Weissman's presentation on big data clusters. We've got database administration tool extensions, Custo. We need this extension for what we're going to have a look at later on in the demo. Machine learning. We did mention that briefly, that if you're wanting to analyze and create some models and everything on your data, then we've got an extension inside of Azure Data Studio where you can work in here, create your notebooks, work with your data, and away you go. I'm not going to cover off machine learning, but as we're seeing, there's loads of different things, and this is what makes Azure Data Studio so flexible based on what you're wanting to do. Now, the main thing is connectivity. Without being able to connect, what are we doing looking after our data estates? Well, that's all taken care of for us. We come to our connections and we've got a number of servers. You can see here I've got a number of groups already created. This is nothing new. We can do this inside of Management Studio. And in your environments, you'd probably do it differently. This is just my demo, and I wanted to show you the different types of connections that I've got and group them appropriately. So I've got local, and if we expand these out, so I've got a local instance of SQL Server 2019 running under containers. I've got Docker installed, and I'm currently running a Docker instance of SQL Server running 2017. From an Azure point of view, I've got an Azure SQL database. I've got a PostgreSQL database. We're going to connect out to Custo. All of these things are just showing from here how we're able to manage and maintain our estate and stay inside of Azure Data Studio. Now, I have got those colors in place. From a settings point of view, this is also what makes Azure Data Studio so flexible for us. When we create our groups, we can assign colors. If we're going to do that, make sure that our connections are associated, or not our connections, make sure our query window connections are associated appropriately with the particular groups. To achieve that, we come to our settings and we want to search for color tab. And when we do, we get the query editor tab color mode. Now, by default, this will be off. Make sure you enable to fill, and then you'll easily be able to visualize, am I connecting to the correct environment? Now, one of the other settings which makes Azure Data Studio so flexible, one of the things that when we were just using Management Studio, people wanted to have a different color theme. And it took ages and ages, and then we finally got a single theme, dark theme. But it's not that easy to apply. Well, with Azure Data Studio, that was taken on board by the tools team and was included out of the box. And it's very simple for us to change the color theme of what we're working in. To do that, we just come down to our cog and we can see color themes. Out of the box, we've got a number of color themes available to us. And as you can see, I'm running in the default light color theme. To show you how quickly and easily it is, let's choose the dark color theme. Boom. Across the entire application, everything is all now dark. That's what you might like. Excellent. We're not going to stay in this for the duration, so it was just to show you how easy it is to change our color theme for what you're wanting. It's just another flexible, easy to use tool. So coming back here, we've looked at some of those settings. With our connections, because we are working in Azure, one of the things that we might have a number of different resources in our subscription. Well, instead of jumping out and going to the Azure portal, having to go and find what's the resource group, what's the actual resource, and spending time getting there, one of the beauties of Azure Data Studio, we can manage and maintain our resources in Azure straight from Azure Data Studio. So how do we go about doing that? Well, on the Connections tab here, down the bottom, we've got Azure. If we click the plus, it asks us if we want to link an account. We click the little plus person to go and add the account. We add our email that's associated to our subscription. It goes off, connects to the subscription, confirms that we have access, and then caches your linked accounts into Azure Data Studio, allowing us to then have an account. For that, we can see our subscription. Under our subscription, there's a number of resources which we can manage and maintain. And if I expand these out, we'll give ourselves a little bit more real estate. We've got our SQL databases, and you can see I've got two Azure SQL databases. The SQL Server, this is the SQL Server that your Azure databases are residing on. We've got PostgreSQL Server, and if we have them configured, we've got Data Explorer clusters, I don't have any, as well as our managed instances. I don't have any of those. Well, for that particular resource, we can right-click and we've got a number of options available to us. The connect, manage, new query, new notebook, etc. We can do all of those from our saved connections up above, or we can do it from here. But the big thing that I wanted to point out to you is we've got this Open in Azure portal. If I click on that Open in Azure portal, it asks us to go out to the website, out to the portal, we click Open. It'll ask us to confirm our account. We're confirming our account, and this will take us straight into that particular resource inside of our subscription. Therefore, we can do things quicker and be more productive. We don't have to waste time of jumping out to another tool, logging in. Where do we find it? Am I going to the right one? Okay, this is just going to make your life so much easier in being able to manage and maintain your estate inside of Azure. So let's go back to Azure Data Studio. Now, a slight difference with Azure Data Studio compared to Management Studio is how we look at managing our instances and databases. In Azure Data Studio, we do that with dashboards. So if we chose our local instance and we said right-click Manage, that will open up a dashboard. We'll give ourselves a little bit more screen real estate. And with our dashboard for that instance, it gives us a little bit of information. So we know what version of SQL Server we're running, the computer name that we're running on, what type of edition, the operating system. We've got database details, backup details. Don't be concerned. This is my demo environment, so I'm not taking any backups. Don't hold that against me. And there's some quick tasks across the top that we're able to go and do. We can look at our databases, and we've got some administration, monitoring, and general tasks. Now, the thing to realize, these tasks here won't be available when you first install, because these are all based on extensions. So we come back to that flexibility, and extensions are the big key. Now, one of the things as an administrator is you're going to have that agent so that you can manage and maintain your agent jobs. Now, when we first come in, we will see that here's our full list of all of our agent jobs. Nothing new here. What you may not be aware of is that we've got the ability to create notebook jobs. And if we click on this tab up the top that says notebooks, this just shows us those notebook jobs. So what is a notebook job? Well, it's an agent job that executes a notebook. What does a notebook have? It has text cells and it has code cells, and we can have multiple. Well, it's executing that, and the result sets for each of those statements are stored in the notebook. We can see our previous runs. We've got a successful run and we've got an unsuccessful run. To create a notebook is very simple. We just click on the new notebook job. Now, there are some prerequisites that we do have to do. You have to have already created your notebook and stored that on an operating system. We need a storage database. A storage database is what's going to store your notebook template as well as the results which come back when it's executed. We also need to create a schedule that the notebook jobs are going to run against. So by that stage, when we come in here and create our notebook job, we navigate to our notebook on the operating system, we choose our storage database, we choose our execution database or where we're going to be executing it against. We give it a name. It will always default the owner of the job is the account which is creating it. Make sure that you change this account to an account that has appropriate permissions and should be executing this job. Give your job a description and we're job done. That's how simple it is. Now, if you happen to be inheriting an environment that somebody else has already created some notebook jobs in, no problem. We can have a look at how that's configured. By clicking on our job, we can see Open Template Notebook, and this will pull from the storage database the templated notebook that is being used to execute that. We can make modifications, redeploy as we need. If you're wanting to actually see the results, we can see here our recent runs. If we right-click on our most recent successful run and we click Open, once again, this is going to our storage database and pulling out that notebook, but it also has our result sets. So therefore, we're able to quickly see what was the statement that was run, what was the details that that statement came back with. Depending on what you're looking at, you could then save this, put it into source control where your colleagues can gain access to it and have access to those same results, especially if they don't have access to that environment, but they need to be able to see the results of that. Now, be careful when you do run this, depending on the size of the result set, all of that result set will be stored inside of the notebook. Also, what is the data in the result set that is coming back? If there's any sensitive data or compliant related data, be careful on making this available to other people. This was just an introduction to you on what a notebook job was, how you set it up, why you might want to use it. I think they're a fantastic creation, and you should really start to have a look at these. We can see here there's a couple of other extensions that we've got, server reports. They're just things providing some reports that somebody's made, giving you an overview of what's happening in your system. Under the general, we've got the machine learning. As I mentioned, we're not going to talk much on that, but we can create our models and start and have a look and analyze our data and train those models to give us the predictions that we do need. Now, one of the things or main things that we want to be able to do, because we've mentioned about connections, is for those connections is running our queries. So how do we do that? Well, we've got two ways of doing that. We can run them from a notebook, or we can open up a execution query and run it that way. So let's have a look at our first notebook. Now, I'm not here to dive in and tell you about notebooks to infinitum. There's plenty of sessions available, and it can be a session on its own. So if you're wanting to learn more about notebooks in particular, make sure you go to Julie Cosmano and Alan Yu from Microsoft to their Power Hour on notebooks. Another great speaker who talks about notebooks is fellow MVP Rob Sewell. Make sure you go to his session on notebooks as well. So what can we actually do? Well, the first thing with notebooks is that we've got the ability to have different languages that our notebooks can be created from. So we have a look at the kernel, and this one's running SQL, which is what we want to run in. Okay, but if I drop this down, we've got a number of languages. So this is another thing that makes Azure Data Studio so flexible. We can work in multiple programming languages, all inside of one tool, therefore being more productive without having to have multiple things open, and we can look like rock stars. Okay. One of the other beauties of it is that depending on the language that we're wanting to run, if I quickly change this to Python, it'll just change the kernel. I'm not going to be able to execute, but we'll change it back. Changing that kernel, so we now have got the Python kernel. Okay, so that means that we can be writing Python code and execute this. Well, one of the beauties, when I've changed that kernel, you may have noticed over to the side here, we've now got this little icon, Manage Packages. If I open this up, this means that when we go and install it, there's certain prerequisites that we need to run this language. And this is a new thing which has come in when notebooks first came about and we were changing the languages. We had to know about all of the prerequisites and make sure that we installed those correctly and what version of this and what version of that. That's all done for us now. We can come in here and see our managed packages. I've already installed for Python, so no big deal, but it shows us everything that we need. If we change to another language and we hadn't already installed the prerequisites, they will have them here, and we can say install those packages, making your life simple to have those supportability from multiple languages inside of your notebooks. So we just come back to our SQL so that we can run this. Okay. When we do execute a statement, we get our result sets. Okay, cool. But where Azure Data Studio gives us a little bit more is that we're easily able to save those result sets out to multiple data formats. So as we can see here, CSV, Excel, JSON, XML, we can even create a chart very, very simply, which means that we can be more productive in getting certain things, creating our reports, to handing off to management, making you look like a rock star. So what does that look like? Okay, we're connected to our local instance, and if we execute this statement, this shouldn't take too long, and there we go. We've got our result sets, 8 rows returned. Tabular format, no big deal. Wouldn't look that flash in a report. But you can see just above our result set, we've got those outputs. So if we wanted to turn that straight into a chart, that's how easy we can turn this into a chart. We can configure other charts if we like. We can even save this image out and drop it straight into our report that we need to hand off to management. Conversely, we can run exactly the same thing from a query window. Now you see here, I'm coloured. That's associated to my local instance. My notebook, however, doesn't have the colour. So if you are going to be using notebooks, make sure that you are connecting to the appropriate environment. So if we run this one, we'll get exactly the same result sets, and our exports are over on this side. You may notice that I've got an extra one, and that's Visualizer. That's because I've also got the Sandance extension installed. At this point in time, unfortunately, Sandance extension or visualization isn't supported or available for us to choose from if we're executing from inside of a notebook. So if we come back to our notebook, one of the other beauties of it, if you're working in an environment, and it's not just for notebooks, actually it's not actually for notebooks, but we've got it here to show you. If you're working in an environment and you run and write a lot of statements very regularly, if you're like me and you're forgetful, then what statement did I run? What did I run it against? Well, we've got an extension called the query history, which makes things nice and simple for you. As long as we've got it in play, we can always go back and have a look at what have we run in our environment. So let's have a look at how we can do that. We open up our terminal window, and as long as we've got the extension in play, we've got this query history tab. If we click on that, we can see, hey, we've got a number of statements that we've already run here. So if I right click on one of those, we've got some options. We can open the query, we can run the query, or we can go and delete this. And the beauty of this, if I want to run this query, it will go and open up a new query window. We'll just give ourselves a little bit more real estate so we can see. So it's automatically opened that query, executed that query against the same environment that we ran it initially, making our lives so much easier. We can remember we ran this is the result sets. Now, from a notebook point of view, we don't need our query history open anymore. A lot of work has gone into making this easy for you to create them so that you can have a very rich experience for yourself or your colleagues with sharing data, as well as storing and maintaining the statements that you're executing and seeing what those results are. To do that, if we just click on here and we'll say edit. Over to the right, we can see we've got a number of icons, but the first one, our default, we're in a rich text mode, which is what we'd be used to seeing when we're working in Word, for example. Okay. As long as we know a little bit about markup language, and we don't even need to do that because we've got some defaults for us under the paragraph where we can choose different types of heading types or paragraph configurations. But let's just make this nice and simple. How quickly can we do it? Title 2, and we can see over on the right hand side in our rich text the formatting that we're getting. We'll go again and we'll go one more. Title 3, and we can see it's even smaller. That's how simple it is. Now, if we really wanted to call out and highlight Title 3, for example, to get your attention, I can use the marker. There we go. We're now highlighted so it draws your attention to it. We can even add images very, very quickly. We've got the add image, and it gives us the format of what we need. Here's a location of an image that I prepared earlier. We'll punch that in, and we can see we've got our Azure Arc image straight away into our text cell in our notebook, and we've got some formatting to make it nice and simple for people to read, understand, and your user experience is fantastic. We can even add links out to wiki pages or URLs or other documents that we want so that it makes it easy to navigate around. One of the other enhancements that has come about from notebooks recently is that we have the ability to, we'll add a new code cell, is that we can copy directly from a URL, paste that in here, and that formatting is maintained. So how do we go about doing that? Let's go back up to here, and we'll say, go back to our installation page. And if we copy a little bit of this installation page, we'll go a little bit more. There we go, that'll do. We'll copy that. We'll come back down to Azure Data Studio. Now we're in the rich text mode. And if we just paste that, it's maintained all of our formatting, put in heading ones, we've got tables, etc. If we wanted to see what that looks like, we can click on our split page. And here's all of our formatting if you wanted to learn a little bit more about things. But I've quickly been able to show you how easy it is to manage and modify your notebooks so that your user experience for both you and your colleagues is fantastic. One more thing I wanted to quickly show you about notebooks is that if you've got some common notebooks that you're wanting to have access to, then if we come to our notebook folder here, and if we expand our notebooks, we can say, okay, I want to open a notebook. Navigate out, and I already had this open, okay? So out to Glenberry's checks. Select the folder, and we've got our notebooks. What we're able to do is that we can actually pin them, and they stay in this pin section. And you're not working. I'll need to restart. But you can see here I've already pinned Glenberry Queries Notebooks into here. So therefore, every time I start Azure Data Studio, that pinned notebook is available. I don't have to go searching for it. Just another way for you to be a little bit more proactive, or I shouldn't say proactive, but a little bit more organized, and you can actually do more, making you look like rock stars. So the next thing we want to have a look at, we spoke about the data platform and it exploding, containerization. So what do we need to see from a containerization point of view? Well, given that we may need to have it in our environment, I've got this notebook that just has some basic Docker commands so that we can see what we've already got in our environment, and we can quickly spin up a new container that we might want to do some testing. So we can quickly spin up a SQL Server in a container, do some work, and destroy it. Well, how do we go about doing that? We can run them inside of our notebook, or we can do it straight from the terminal window. So if we wanted to see what have we currently got running, so Docker PS, I've got one instance, and that lines up with what we saw under the connections for containers. I had a 2017 instance. Now, if that wasn't running, I could use the Docker start command to start that instance. If I wanted to see the images that I've got available to me so that I can create my containers, I just run the Docker images command, and this lists for me, I've got the 2019 and the 2017 latest images that I can then use when I'm creating a new container. So if we wanted to pull down a different image, we can use the Docker pull command. Now let's go and create a container, and I'll just show you how quickly it is for us to take this command and spin up a new instance of SQL Server running in a container. Now, yes, I'm using 2019. Yes, I've got my SA password exposed. This is my demo environment. You have no access to it. Do not use this password in production. But what are some of the parameters? Well, P2435, that's our port that our machine is using to connect to this particular container. The 1433 is the port internally that SQL Server is listening on, and that's mapped to 2435, which is the external port. And we're giving it a name of SQL 2019_2. We'll execute that, and we've already got our instance running with that image. You can't do an install of SQL Server that quick, so let's have a look. Is it running? So if we run the docker ps, and we now have 2 instances up and running. We can see our 2019 instance has been running for 12 seconds. We can do our work, connect to that. We no longer need it, and we want to blow it away. So we're able to use the docker stop SQL 2019_2. That will then stop our container image. Once that's completed, we're then able to say remove SQL 2019_2, and we've blown away our image. If we have a look at docker ps minus all, we have the single image of that container which is up and running and available in our environment. So just quickly, I was able to show you, without even stepping outside of this tool, I could spin up a container, I could connect to it via SQL Server, and I could download additional images and destroy that image, continuing my work, being very productive on my testing without having to consume a large amount of resources. The next type of thing that we want to have a look at, and it goes along the lines of being productive or using different types of connections, is Custo. So if we have a look at Custo, once again we can see we're connected to a green connection, and that's for in Azure, and we're connecting to our Custo environment, which happens to be one of the 3 types of connections that we've got in there. So we're connecting to Azure. Now, Custo is, why would we want to use it? Well, it's highly optimized for us to work through and consume and query against high volume streaming data, i.e. events that might be coming from your Azure SQL database. And from a monitoring point of view, you're wanting to consume and analyze those events so that you can see what is happening and put in tasks appropriately based on the events which are coming back. So how do we go about doing that? Well, Custo uses KQL, slight variation to T-SQL, but we're easily able to read that. So we're looking at storm events that are occurring inside of Texas, Washington, or California, and we're wanting to group those events for the event counts based on the start times per state. So if we execute that statement, this will go off and going and hitting our temporary Custo environment, and we've pulled back a number of results. We've got 75 rows. We'll just get rid of our terminal window. And just like any other query, we've got data which has come back in a tabular format. Just like we saw when we ran the query against our local instance of SQL Server, we've got a number of results that we can put it out to. And I did mention about Sandance. If I click on Sandance, and it's going to open up a new window running Sandance and pass those result sets into Sandance. And it gives us more of capability of playing with the type of visualization that we might best depict the data that we're pulling back. So by default, this is showing us in a columnar graph. Might not be exactly what we're wanting to do, but hey, we can change this. Let's change it to a scatter graph. All right, so it's just giving us a line based on our event counts out to just under 700, for example. Okay, but that might not be what we're wanting to see. So we can quickly and easily change our axis, and we say, okay, we want to do this based on start time. Therefore, we're actually seeing what are the start times over the year that this data is relating to, when are the storms occurring, and which of those 3 states has more storm events that we're then able to make our predictions on. All from that high volume data, streaming data that we're able to collect. Now, one of the other things that I want to bring to your attention and talk to you about is that now this is something that has been around for quite some time, but just not inside of Azure Data Studio, definitely not inside of Management Studio, and that's support for database projects. Where I said it's been around for quite some time, we've been able to deal with those and do them using Visual Studio. So therefore we have to step out into another tool, create our project, work in Visual Studio, check things in, connect it to our source control, promote them up, allowing others to pull those changes, etc. Well, as long as we have the database projects extension, we've now got support for that inside of Azure Data Studio. Once again, we don't have to step out. We can be very productive and we can be happy with ourselves in that our changes and our database changes are secure. We can place them into source control. We can also make sure that others are using the versions that we're using. So how do we go about doing that? Well, we come over to our Explorer, and as I mentioned, as long as we have the database projects extension installed, if we expand this, it shows us that we've got these three options. We can create a new create a new project, we can open an existing project, or we can create a project from a database. For this demo, I'm going to keep it nice and simple, and I'm going to create a new project. We do need to give it a project name. We'll just give it a name called Speaking Events. Navigate out to our local repository. Select that folder, and it's created our new project. By default, first time you do this, it will ask you, do you want to change the settings of where the projects are to be placed on a regular basis? That's up to you, because you may have different locations based on what you're working. This is my demo environment, so I'm not going to do that. So once we've created our project, we can right click and we've got a number of options available to us. As I said, this is just going to be simple, and I'm adding a new script, and we'll just call it deployment, and it's created us a new deployment.sql script. We're then able to add in our T-SQL on what we want to place into our script. Here's one that I provided earlier, and it's very simple. We're just creating a schema and an associated table for our database project. We'll click Save. Now that we've got that, we're in a place where we can say Build. Okay, run the build, and it'll open up the terminal window, run through the build, and as long as we've made no problems, then this should complete without any errors or warnings coming up. Given it is quite simple, I'd be very surprised if we do get anything. And there we go, we've build succeeded. So we're now good to continue from that side of things, and we can publish a database project so that we're able to then either have it in the environment, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to put it to a script that we can then add that script to our source control, that our colleagues can then pick up and deploy this into their environments. So once again, by hitting the publish, we get to choose where do we want to connect. So we'll go to our local, right, and our server group, don't save you, we'll hit connect. Our database, where do we want to go to? Well, we want to go to our past speaking events, and we've got either publish it, which will take us straight to that database and publish it, or I'm going to go generate the script, which is what we're looking at doing. So it's doing a build. Once it's completed that build, it will swap over from our output over to our tasks, and it will start to generate the script that we need, that we can then apply this in any of the environments that we want to. So while that's running, we've been talking about source control. Now, in Management Studio, out of the box, we don't get source control. We can achieve that with some vendor products. But inside of Azure Data Studio, we have support for source control directly. and we've just finished our script deployment creation. So there we go, we've succeeded. With that, if we come over to, as long as we've got a valid source control software, i.e. Git, installed in our environment, and we've got a repository, we can open that. We come across to our source control, and you can see I've got a number of files now, and the majority from here down are all associated to the database project that we just created. Now, you can either, if you're a command line person and you know all of your Git commands, straight from the terminal, you can run your Git commands to commit these changes, push them to your repository, pull your changes that somebody else has made. Or we've got the ability here that we've got the commands available to us from the menu, and we can choose what we want to achieve. If we come back and have a look at our script, what does that look like? Well, we need to use SQL CMD, and that then enables us to be able to run this statement. If I look for deployment, there's a number of options in here, and we come down here. Here's our schema, and here's our new table that we've created. We can place this in, our colleagues can use it, and everybody's working on the same page. Now, the last thing that I want to take you through in this demo is around the deployment experience. And so if we come back to our connections and we come up to our ellipses, we've got new deployment. And if we click on this, opens up a new window, and we've got a number of options available to us. And these options are based on whether it's on-premises, cloud, or things that can go on both. Now, the default one, we want to install SQL Server on a Windows environment. If we then hit select, we can then scroll down just a little bit. We choose the version of SQL Server we want, and what this will do is it will go out to the internet, connect to the appropriate location, and pull down the installation media for us to be able to install SQL Server. I've already got that, so I don't want to do that, but this is an experience for you. We might want to deploy SQL Server into a container. Now, earlier in the demo, I actually took you through how we can do that manually, but we can do that via here, and it's a different experience, and it does everything for you. Instead of having to know, pulling down the image, and what the command is to spin it up, start it, it's all done for us, giving us a much better experience. Same as with big data clusters. It gives us the ability of what do we need to follow to create that big data cluster. Now, I did speak about Edge, okay? So if we selected Edge and we come down here, we're saying, yes, we're going to accept Microsoft's policy agreements, and we get to choose where are we wanting to deploy to, a local container instance, a remote container instance, or we might want to go out to Azure. So let's choose if we wanted to go to an Azure IoT Hub and VM. Well, straight away I'll get a warning, I can't do that. And that's because it's telling me that I don't currently have all of the prerequisites to do that. So I would need to go and install the Azure CLI tool, and we can do that straight away by just hitting the install tools, which would then allow us to meet the requirements, and we can continue on our deployment experience. So all from inside of Azure Data Studio, we can deploy to multiple environments, all making us more productive and learning about different things that is the data platform. So the last thing that I wanted to show you, and I had mentioned at the start in the slide deck around the Insiders version and what it can give, and you are working on the bleeding edge. So let's have a look at Insiders. Once we've installed Insiders and we start it up, we've got the same look and feel as we do the GA release. The difference being when you come into the welcome page, you'll see Insiders. Also, your icon, it's a different color. So if you do have both of them, just make sure that you are working in the correct one for what you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to work on insiders just to see the new features and play with them and see what they do to be able to provide that feedback, then that's fantastic. Being able to provide feedback is very simple for us to do. We can either go to GitHub, have a look at all of the outstanding requests or issues, and we can comment on those or upvote them. Alternatively, straight from inside of Azure Data Studio, both insiders and also the GA, down the bottom right hand corner here, we can say tweet feedback. We've got a way we can go submit a bug, request a missing feature, and that will go and put those straight into the requests over on GitHub, or you can tell the tools team, hey, you're doing a fantastic job, put it in Twitter and tweet. Okay, so bear in mind, make sure that you interact with the product team, fix these issues, upvote things for everybody in the community so that it becomes a much better product based on what people are doing. Now, the thing that I wanted to show you inside of the Insiders edition, if we come to the script that we just used in our database project, as we saw, it's nothing special. We're just creating a schema and we're creating a table using that new schema. But what I wanted to show you, where features are available in Insiders versus not, and still being worked on, this is a great little feature, I feel, that will allow you to start and look at taking your existing T-SQL scripts and migrating them across into notebooks, or vice versa. We've got this script, and you may see just up here, which we didn't have in the GA version, export as notebook. If I click that, it's gone and created a notebook for us, and it's taken my T-SQL script across into a notebook, therefore making your life so much easier with your existing scripts, placing them into notebooks, and then you can come back if you need to and enhance the documentation, add some images, add some links, etc. Also, what we've got, you may notice, we've got this little arrow over to the right, export notebook as SQL, and it changes it back to a SQL statement. And there's our T-SQL scripting. So how does it go about doing that? Well, so that it can identify the text cell versus the code cell, we need to use block comments. And it's saying, for this block comment, that's a text cell. Then it's looking at, oh, here's some code, that's going in a code cell. Have a play. I hope this is a good way and a good introduction for you to start and use notebooks. They have such a wide variety of exercises for you to use. With that, that brings us to the end of the demo for today's session. So let's go back into the slide deck. We did mention that we'd spend most of the time in Azure Data Studio, and we have done that. We've only got a couple of minutes left on the sessions, so what have we actually covered off today? In summary, what have we looked at? Well, I've given you an introduction to what is Azure Data Studio, where it's come from, how it's got to where we are now at the ripe old age of 3. I've given you an overview of the types of things that you can use Azure Data Studio with, and how you can become more productive and only having to stay inside of this single tool. In the demo, what did we work through? The welcome experience. I showed you dashboards to be able to manage your environments, whether that be at the instance level or at the database level. I showed you how Azure Data Studio's flexibility, because of the settings that we're able to use, and also all of the extensions that we're able to pick and choose from based on your role. The language support. Showed you we could run T-SQL, we could run PowerShell, we could run Git, we could run Python, Scala, R, all KQL, all with inside of Azure Data Studio without jumping out. Our connectivity. What did we connect to? Local instances, Azure SQL Database. We showed Postgres. We showed containerizations. I spoke about you could go out to big data clusters even though I didn't have one. Okay. Notebooks, introduced you to them, some of the feature changes, how they're fantastic around getting that user experience with your documentation, plus also the associated scripts running with it, and notebook jobs. Make sure you have a look at those and incorporate those into your environment. Being able to jump out straight from the Azure portal to the resource and manage those environments in your subscriptions. Introduced you to database projects, and we rounded out with the deployment experience on those various different ways that we can deploy SQL Server to different environments without having to actually know the components behind it. And we rounded out giving you a glimpse at the insiders and some of the little features that you can see in insiders that you just don't get until they're made available. So with that, I will be around for a little while to answer questions, but a big thank you for being part of my session. Remember, there's multiple ways for you to win prizes as part of this wonderful conference. Post a selfie with the hashtag DPS2020. Give session feedback for both my session, all of the other speakers that you go to. Provide us feedback, as well as conference feedback. The conference organizers want to know, hey, what have they done well? What can they improve on to make your experience even better? If you haven't already done so, go and visit the sponsors and the exhibitors in the virtual halls. Make sure you follow along on @TheDataGeeks and @Data AI Summit. Enjoy your summit. Thank you very much for participating, and I look forward to talking to you once again and answering any of your questions.